In Malaysia, people ask, ketuanan Melayu, the idea that Malay people are superior to other races in this country. Now, I have a Malay background. I'm partly Malay on my father's side, Sarawak Malay. But here in Sarawak, maybe we don't believe in ketuanan Melayu, not because it's false teaching, but possibly because Borneo is a shared territory between the Malays and other races. And in fact, we don't even consider the Chinese. I mean, yes, we consider Chinese people to be non-Bumiputra, and so in terms of when it comes to Bumiputra holdings like finance and studies and land distribution, the question of Chinese versus Bumiputra is a question that the state grapples with at a state level, and it's a bureaucratic thing. However, culturally, nominally, no. Well, Malays go to Chinese stores all the time. Chinese people produce halal food all the time. There's no conflict between the Malay and the Chinese. We eat laksa, we eat kolomi. As long as it's halal, we'll eat it. And even if it's unhalal, we'll also eat. Not that we don't eat it, but we will. If it's not so halal, then of course people will know to stay away. Okay, and they will mention whether one is halal or not halal. There is a part even in history, and I have seen this happen, that actually the Chinese are older in Sarawak than the Malays. So if you talk about Bumiputra being the people who were there first, then I'm sorry, in Sarawak, the Chinese win over the Malays. Because how did Sarawakian Malay become Malay? That is the conversation that's the topic of today's monologue. I've been reflecting over this, and I've been inspired to speak, Malay has Malaya, Chinese have China, Indians have India, says the Chief Minister of Kedah. And it's possible that, yes, okay, over in Malaya, you believe that, that the land in Malaya belongs to the Malays. No. Who are the Malays? What is Malay civilization? And then when you come to think of Sarawak, we still have a place called Santubong. And in Medium, I just recently wrote about this. In Santubong, which is the place of the great mountain, Gunung Santubong, Mount Santubong, overseeing the sea, the South China Sea, where the resorts of Damai Beach and Camp Pomai are. You can always imagine the way the river of Santubong moves out to the sea and touches and caresses the beaches along the way. It's a beautiful sight to see. Just drive up north of Kuching for 20 minutes and you've reached this great place called the Santubong Bay. And it's been a place of trade and settlement in northwestern Borneo for 2,500 years. With such a long history, you wonder who established it. I noticed when I was there, and there are a couple of archaeological sites in the area now open for public viewing. I was there during the opening by the Institute of Malay Foundation of Sarawak, the Al-Khairat Yayasan Budaya Malaya Sarawak, together with the YB Nancy Shukri, was opening it at Sentex, Santubong. And I spoke to her ladyship, and I also went to visit the various sites the day it was opened. Apparently, YB Nancy's home, holiday home in Santubong village, was used and is continuously used today as the museum for Wallace, William Wallace, who was a naturalist, a historian, not historian, but he was a naturalist. And some people said he was the co-writer of Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection, but in fact it's been postulated that he was the one who founded the work in Sarawak through the Sarawak theory of evolution by natural selection. And that he shared this with Charles Darwin, and Charles Darwin stole the ideas from Wallace. You see, when Wallace was still alive, it was called the Darwin-Wallace theory of evolution by natural selection. And when Wallace had passed away, there was no more Wallace there. It was just the Darwin theory of evolution by natural selection. So this man was a sneaky professor who was able to steal somebody else's work and use it for his own credibility. And today, anything containing evolution by natural selection is called Darwinian, when it originated as Wallacean. And it was proposed to Darwin because Darwin had connections, especially with the Royal Scientific institutions in London. I mean, you can see through the biodiversity of Sarawak and Borneo how someone like William Wallace, what's his name? Alfred Russel Wallace, would be able to see and derive from noticing the specimens and nature in the Bornean forests how evolution takes place, and how it takes place through a kindred connection, which is very important for understanding natural selection. And that was one of the topics spoken about during Brook Sarawak, when you had botanists like Wallace and Odoardo Beccari around at the same time, who were living with James Brooke. And James Brooke was very interested in natural history, obviously. And he would compile a number of species of tropical animals here and there, and, be part of the scientific discovery. That was the Sarawak during the 19th century. But going back in time, as I said, back to the very beginning, the heart of it, in these places of archaeological interest that was open on that very same day, besides the Wallace Museum, there was an archaeological museum located at Bukit Maras behind the village of Santubong. Okay? And that archaeological site contains an altar, tantric Buddhism, artifacts, and a lot of things pointing towards a society that had been culturalized by a particular empire known as Srivijaya. And that could be the fact that that was the time when the natives of Santubong were being Malayanized. And that the Malay identity, the pre-Islamic Malay identity, was an operation system that was necessary for them, for any place in the 7th century, to get a foothold with the economics of the area. However, prior to that, I postulate that Santubong had existed as an iron smelting factory and a place for collecting jungle produce and the production of iron through the smelting process for China, for the China trade in the Nanyang region, the Southern Sea region, for thousands of years, starting from the Zhou dynasty up to about the Song dynasty. And actually, around the Tang dynasty would have been the time when they came in conjunction with Srivijaya. So Santubong's own polity was Sino-native. So you had Chinese traders there. We've got Chinese people in Borneo, in Sarawak. In fact, it's not just the iron slag and the production that makes me think of them being the Chinese people. No. It's also the fact that China has many jungle produce that's part of its own traditional medication, like bird's nest. And they didn't stop using that. They don't have it much in China. They didn't stop using that until they haven't stopped using it, in other words. And where do they source it from? They source it from here. They came down. It's not that far. It's 3 weeks by boat. Come down from the southern coast of China to Borneo. It's very simple. No landfall, practically. Arrive here and wait for the next monsoon to take them back up to China. It's easier for them to come to Santubong than it is for them to go to Palembang, Srivijaya, and other places. In fact, it could have been postulated that Santubong was one of the last ports from the Malay world to China, and one of the first ports from China to the Malay world. And that they married with the local Austronesian natives. And why don't I say Malay natives? Because Austronesian is the similar race to the Malays. I would say Austronesian natives, similar to the Orang Ulu people, because of the megaliths that are found in Santubong. Batu Bagamba, okay? And these sort of art is replicated, no other place is it replicated in the whole of Sarawak except in Santubong and in the Barrio Highlands. So if you have a production of one particular type of art in two very distinct locations, the conclusion that you can make is that it's the same people who lived in this area and then moved to that area. And these Austronesians would have lived in a... if you're going to watch the movie Moana, they'll be like those Hawaiian people living in accommodation by the sea. They would have lived like that, in that kind of civilization, and then welcome the Chinese people. And because of the factory conditions, some of them may feel that this is not a good life for them, so they move into someplace into the interior. Or when they start to be Malayanized, they do not feel that they're right with the Malayanization, so they move into the interior. Slowly but surely they left or sublimated into the cultures that remain coastal. And thus you have the Santubong Malays that have both Chinese and Dayak Austronesian blood in them. And when you see history like this, where is your ketuanan Melayu? How can you be so arrogant to say that, that the Malays are above all others in this country? The Malay language and culture and civilization throughout the Malay region, which includes Tanah Melayu as well, was used as an international or regional culture operating system to encourage cohesion of trade, and especially cohesion under certain empires like Srivijaya, and later on like Malacca. And the legacy of Malacca, of course, is the Malay. And when that legacy, of course, has been hurt through colonialism, then there is a problem. Sukarno warned Malaysia and Malaysian people about the fact that they would lose their identity in very fastidious ways unless they regroup with the Indonesian Republic, which believes in a diverse expression of all races. But first and foremost, the way to keep your race is to lose the racial identity and accept the national identity first as Indonesian. And so much so you see Chinese people from Indonesia even speaking Indonesian, even when they go back to China, they still remember their Indonesian songs and Indonesian ways of life. Malaysia, in its exclusivity, but in its exclusive approach, with the Malays are Malays and Chinese are Chinese, and it's notable, and it mirrors the colonial divide and rule mentality that did not exist in Southeast Asia prior to the coming of the British. We have inherited this, and this is what Sukarno calls neo-colonialism, which is why the formation of Malaysia was seen as neo-colonial. It did not base anything like on Pancasila, for instance. It didn't have a concept of a country. And it's only in the 70s that the likes of Kuke Kim, a professor of history, helped to record Rukunegara. See, even a Chinese professional helped to record what Rukunegara is. There is no Kedaulatan Melayu, the Ketuanan Melayu in Malaysia. We are made out of all these cultures that we consider as migrant, and a mixture of all of them. And it just so happens that at certain times in our history, certain ethnicities and certain cultures ruled the roost. And we hold on to these old, facile ideas. We're not only going to be drowned by the commiseration that the passing of time causes for those who stick to these things. We lose what dynamism and charisma created the golden ages of the Malay people in the first place. That dynamism still exists in Indonesia somewhere. It exists in Sarawak, definitely. We are very proud to be Malay in Sarawak, very proud. With Songket, with Joget, with Zapin. We have a shared Malay culture with the rest of the world, but why do we not spear our Chris and say Sarawak Tanah Melayu? No, because it's not Tanah Melayu. And with Sarawak and Sabah now part of Malaysia, we are not Tanah Melayu. And Malaya, in honest history, is also not Tanah Melayu, because Malaya includes Orang Asli, Aboriginal people. And the Aboriginal people, the original people of West Malaysia, for their sakes, when they live in the interiors of Taman Negara and so forth, what land is it for them? Yet they had established our prehistory. And they've been here for thousands of years. And have close blood connections with the Khmers, with the Mons and the Varavati people of ancient times. Their history goes back not hundreds of years, but thousands of years. And yet they don't complain of it not being Tanah Orang Asli. You see, all of this has to do with politics and elections. And when people get aroused by politics and elections and don't honestly look at history from the historical point of view, then we get lost in it. Thank you for listening.